All right, can everybody hear?
I hear you very well.
Okay, I can hear you too. Can everybody in the audience hear? Okay, well, we're going to have to kind of wing it because, you know, Mike had just told me that they like to mess with him a lot of times too, and I think we all understand that. Because I think all of us in the audience, and myself included, we've been messed with by them, in quotes.
Parentheses, triple parentheses.
Yes,
yeah.
Triple parentheses, exactly. Thank you, everybody, for coming in and tuning in. Hopefully, we'll have enough time afterwards that maybe people can ask you some questions. Mike, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. But first, I wanted to talk with you about your book, The Bad War. I found it extremely informative, direct to the point. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce you. This is M.S. King, has joined us tonight, the webmaster of TomatoBubble.com. He is a private investigative journalist and a researcher based in the New York City area. He is a 1987 graduate of Rutgers University, and you had a 30-year career in marketing and advertising, which has equipped him, or you, with a unique perspective when it comes to understanding how public opinion is indeed scientifically manufactured. Your Madison Avenue marketing combined with city boy instincts to make M.S. King one of the most tenacious detectors of things that don't add up in the world today. You have admitted quirks, or you have your irreverent disdain for conventional wisdom and an uncanny ability to ferret out and weave together the important data points that others miss. Had Sherlock Holmes, and this is your quote, had Sherlock Holmes been an actual historical personage, I would have been his reincarnation. You are also the author of The War Against Putin, The British Mad Dog, Planet Rothschild, The Real Roosevelts, Napoleon versus the Old and New World Orders, I Don't Like Ike, and more. Your other interests include the animal kingdom, philosophy, chess, cooking, literature, and history, with an emphasis on the late 19th to 20th centuries. Have I forgotten anything?
Well, that about covers it. I would just add a few more books to that list since that summary was written. My latest is a book called St. Joseph of Wisconsin, and it is the true story of the late great Senator Joseph McCarthy. And prior to that, I published Andrew the Great. It was about a year and a half ago, and that's the true story of Andrew Jackson.
Oh, okay, right.
So,
right. Okay. Well, you know, I plan on. I had joined. He also has a Patreon. I encourage everybody to go to Patreon.com and look up Michael S. King and become a Patreon of his, and you'll get all of your latest books there. Correct? Or most of them that are in PDF?
Well, yeah, you'll get them all in PDF form, and then they're available in paperback form on Amazon under the term MS King. Also, if you go to the website, TomatoBubble.com, it'll take you to all these places. But there's a free report that people can sign up for. It's called How to Respond to an Anti-Conspiracy Theorist. And it gets you on my free updates list. So it doesn't cost anything, but definitely submit for that report and the free update list at TomatoBubble.com.
I have signed up for that, and I love all of your updates, and I read all of them, so I encourage everybody to do the same. Okay, so I was wondering if you could kind of start us out with a backstory, because when I read this, I didn't understand why things happened the way they did until I read your book, and you brought everything together for me and helped me understand why and how they put all these pieces together and made World War II happen, and then consequently we find ourselves in the position we're in today.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, World War II is so important to understand because it's not just a historical event in the way that, say, the history of the Roman Empire or the ancient Egyptians were, or something like that. No, because it is the foundation of the modern world. It is the founding mythology of the modern world. Everything stems from that history-altering event of the big world war. I mean, actually, it's two world wars that should be called World War Part 1 and World War Part 2. It's essentially brought to us by the same usual suspects for the same usual motives, both world wars. And
Right.
those wars reshaped the world, this crazy upside-down world we live in. Everything stems from that. The globalism, the United Nations, the World Bank, the NATO, all the subsequent wars, the International Monetary Fund, and on it goes. It's impossible to understand the modern world 100%
Indeed.
without understanding that event.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so how would you, let's start out by how this all kind of started. I know people like to talk about the Marxist revolution in Russia, but it goes farther back than that, right?
Well, yeah, and in my book, what's unique about my book, and I don't think you'll find this in any other book about World War II, is I give a very good summary, and it's short and sweet and very easy to understand, of the whole globalist versus nation-state struggle, the whole globalist movement, which dates back, well, really about 250 years. But I start the book out in the mid-1800s when the when the Marxist subversives were gearing up to overthrow governments, and when these globalist institutions already, I mean, I'm talking 30 years before World War I, they were putting the pieces in place for a major European war.
Right, and this was
And I think that's an important background.
right, and this was like the Franco-Prussian War is really important to know. How because the Ottoman Empire, I think you were saying, the Ottoman Empire had control over Palestine, and obviously now we know that that was their goal all along.
Well,
wasn't it?
that was an important element. There was two major objectives that they had for starting these world wars. They wanted to establish a nation state in Israel, and then the other objective was to tear down all of the existing countries and empires, kingdoms, and replace them with a so-called democratic system which they could control. Mm-hmm. So they were wars for globalism, but also for Zionism. And you go back to the 1890s. I've got quotes in the book. The early Zionist leaders, they were talking about the establishment of Israel as a state as if it was a done deal. They just needed about 40, 50 years and it would happen.
Right.
And it's really incredible that they made such statements because at the time, like you said, Palestine was under the realm of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and it was all Arabs living there. And they just weren't going to hand over Palestine to the European Jews, but and yet they spoke as if it would happen inevitably. So what did they know? Well, what they knew is that the major war to end all wars was coming 15, 20, 25 years down the road, but they're long-term planners. They knew it was coming, and they had all the chess pieces in place. And when World War I broke out, they made their move. Germany was aligned with Turkey. So once the Allies won, and they split up Turkey just like they split up Germany, and the British took over Palestine.
Right, and Kaiser Wilhelm I, and Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, they were really good leaders in Germany back then. They kind of foresaw, especially Bismarck, correct?
Yeah, Bismarck worked very hard to prevent what the globalists were planning, which was a major European war. And to that end, he established defensive alliances with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and also with the Russian Empire, the Tsar.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the great powers of Central and Eastern Europe. They were in a defensive alliance. So the British and the French, who were the hitmen for the Rothschild dynasty, they couldn't get to them. They were too strong. And I go into the book how the Benjamin Disraeli, the Jewish Prime Minister of Great Britain in the late 1800s, the tricks that he played to break up that alliance. And instead of Austria-Hungary being aligned with Russia, they broke that alliance. Well, it's not a long story, but it's in the book. And they managed to flip Russia, and England and France embraced Russia in an alliance. And this way they were able to play a two-front war against Germany.
Right.
So this was all strategic maneuvering going on decades in advance before the actual fighting started.
Right.
And it's critical to understand because you read these idiotic reviews of World War II, and it's like you would think that it started on September 1st, 1939, when the German-Polish War broke out. But when you look at the previous 40, 50, 60 years of context and the buildup, you clearly see that they had as their intention the destruction of the German Empire from way back, of Germany, and also splitting up Austria-Hungary and Russia. This was all planned many years in advance. And when you understand that, then you begin to get a bigger picture that this was not about some crazy man with a funny mustache wanting to take over the world. It's just a joke. We were all raised on that.
Right.
And it's very difficult to get people to break out of that.
Yes,
but I think I do a very effective job in the Bad War because I keep it simple. I cover a lot of ground. There's a lot of photos in there. So it's very readable. And it's had a very, very powerful impact on people, which is why Amazon eventually banned it, even though it was selling and making a lot of money for them as well.
Right. Yeah, and we know Jeff Bezos is in their pocket. So, yeah, and I I love that book, and I really recommend everybody to get that because it just brought...
Yeah, and I would mention the Bad War, you can only find that at tomatobubble.com because nobody will sell it. So now I sell it privately, which is a shame because, I at one time it was selling like crazy on Amazon.
How many years was it selling for?
Yeah, because new people were being exposed to it. But anyway, your readers can find it at tomatobubble.com. You look on the side tabs. There's one for the Bad War. That's the only place you can get it is at my website now.
Which is a shame because it's an awesome book.
Thank you.
Now Germany, they like to paint Germany as anti-Semitic in its roots, and that's really not the case.
No, not at all. Historically, the Germans are the most civil, the most gracious, just nice people in Europe. It's always been the case. They've given them this reputation as these militaristic, warmongers, but it's a total lie. In Germany, the Jews.
Shit. Hello?
Very well economically. They had high positions.
Right.
So, you have to ask yourself then what went wrong all of a sudden after World War I? Why did they suddenly turn anti-Semitic? Nobody asked that question, but
right.
It's a very logical question.
Right.
You're getting along fine for such a long time, and then all of a sudden there's this big problem. I mean, think of if you had two friends who were buddies for a long time and there was no problem, then one day, they're at each other's throats. The logical person has got to ask, okay, what happened?
Right.
We're not allowed to ask what happened.
Right. Because if you do, then you're anti-Semitic, and everybody's so afraid to challenge
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
the status quo and the the state-sponsored story that,
yeah.
and they're trying to pass laws now to enforce that. I don't know if you've seen
Well,
that
in
lately,
Europe,
but-
in Europe, it's already the case.
right,
What they do here in America now is they won't carry your book on Amazon. Or you can print your book, you can sell your book. So technically, you have that freedom.
right,
But for all intents and purposes, if you can't sell on Amazon, and if none of the major publishing houses will touch your book, who are you selling to? Just
Right.
a handful of people already in the choir. So yes, we have hardcore censorship going
Right.
on in America right now. It's getting worse.
yeah, they are actually trying to push through a bill called S.1. It's S.1, and it's like a 4-part bill where they want to make anti-Semitism a law punishable by jail time. Well, it initially was with jail time, and then they took that off, and now just punishable by up to $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah, it's getting really bad. But
Yeah.
back to your book. So we're around the period of the Franco-Prussian Wars ended, and we're coming up to World War I. And Disraeli, you said, broke up that alliance between the three empires. I think you called them
Right.
the three empires in
Yeah.
the book.
It was called the Three Emperors League. It was Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. So then the British came along and they created a wedge between Austria-Hungary and Russia, and Germany was very close to Austria-Hungary. So now instead of being allied with the great power of the East, Russia, the Germans and the French could play Russia off against the Central Powers. So there's some really dirty dealing that went on in preparation of World War I, which was completely and totally imposed on Germany. Germany was actually, of all the countries, Germany was the last to begin mobilizing its troops. They only went into action when all of the other countries had already decided to go to war. It was totally self-defensive war, and yet at the end of World War I, they were forced to take the blame, and they were severely punished, both monetarily and in terms of the territory that was stolen from them.
Right. That was the Versailles. I don't know if I'm
The
pronouncing
Treaty
it.
of Versailles, yeah.
The Treaty of Versailles, yes. Now, I know that Adolf Hitler had participated in World War I, and he was a highly decorated soldier. Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
him?
you're coming in a little bit faint, but I did hear you.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Hitler was a war hero. There's no question about it. He volunteered for service, and he was turned down by the Austro-Hungarian military. He was very skinny. He had tuberculosis when he was younger, and they deemed him not really physically fit. So he signed up for the Bavarians, part of Germany, and he won the German Iron Cross, second class and first class. And they didn't give those out like candy. It was only like maybe 1 out of 50 Germans got that. You had to demonstrate unusual bravery on the battlefield. He sustained a very bad leg injury, and he could have stayed home after the injury. But once he healed up, he went back to the front at a very dangerous position, running messages.
Wasn't that the most dangerous job in the service?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're running across no man's land.
Right.
So he was very fortunate, almost blessed. And then on the second occasion, he was gassed. I mean, but after his leg was blown up, he went back. He could have stayed home. So, this guy was not by any means any kind of shirker. And even some of the accounts by the establishment historians, they will concede that he demonstrated unusual courage. So nobody can take that away from him, not even his enemies.
Right. Absolutely.
And then he was gassed at the end of the war, and by the time he healed up, Germany had surrendered, and he came to figure out how Germany was sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And very soon afterwards, he became an activist. He wanted to avenge the terrible wrong that was imposed on Germany. But yes, he was a true war hero, not one of these phony baloney heroes like Theodore Roosevelt,
Right.
who participated in a battle where the enemy was outnumbered 15-1.
Right.
And then they portrayed it as the hero of San Juan Hill, charging up the hill on horseback. They were on foot, actually. It's a total joke. I mean, there's a number of historical personages where, they build up a fake war record because they're already planning to a political career for the future. Now, with Hitler, that was not the case. He was the deal.
Right.
The man was absolutely fearless on the battlefield, and then later on throughout life during his political rise.
Right. I noticed that there was, during all this and prior to World War One and early 1900s, all the way through till actually today, there seemed to be a heavy influence of communist Jewry in Europe. And now, and in my opinion, what we see now is basically, that the Bolsheviks never disappeared. They're actually in charge right now.
Yeah, and Bolshevism being international means that, even though the Soviet Union collapsed, the cancer just appears somewhere else. They're everywhere.
Right.
Western Europe is Bolshevik. The United States, the Democratic Party is Bolshevik. And make no mistake, if they ever got full power, these Democrats, these Obamas and Pelosi's and so on, they would do to us exactly what the Bolsheviks did to the White Russian counter-revolutionaries.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
they are capable of anything.
And that was really brutal. They were just absolutely brutal to those poor people in Russia during the revolution.
Yeah.
What year was that?
Well, it started after the Tsar abdicated in 1917, and then for a while they had a so-called democratic socialist government, and then the Bolsheviks overthrew that at the end of 1918,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was a counter-revolution, so you had a civil war, which didn't end until 1922.
Right, and that was
And
with the White Army, right?
Yeah, the resistors were called the White Army versus the Reds. And then after the Reds prevailed, they went about their mass extermination of millions and millions of people to solidify the revolution. And this brutality was known throughout the world, and it shocked people, what Lenin did and then what Stalin did. So, and Germany was heading in this direction.
Right.
Because of the economic collapse brought on by the Versailles Treaty and the globalists. So by the time the early 1930s rolls around, Germany is either going to go full-blown Bolshevik,
right,
or a savior is going to arise and consolidate the opposition against them. And it's really remarkable, but Hitler pulled it off. And he did so democratically,
Yeah, he was.
He was elected. He was elected chancellor.
Yes, he was, wasn't he?
Or rather, his party was elected to the not the majority, but they had a plurality of seats. But the communists still had a lot of seats in the Bundestag, and the Social Democrats had a lot of seats too. So it was still chaos, and the communists were agitating to overthrow the whole system. And then Hitler was granted emergency powers because of that.
Right, because they kept
became
right. Weren't they organizing? They kept organizing strikes and just interfering with basically everyday function of government back then.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit similar to what we see being thrown at Trump now. Only this had a more,
right.
I guess it was stronger It was already turning violent.
Right.
So they were throwing everything they could at Hitler in his first year, and they failed, and he only got stronger. And it's interesting, though, just a few years into his program, all of the German people, there were like 5 million who had voted for the communists. They all, I mean, obviously the hardcore Bolsheviks are what they are. They stayed what they are. I'm just talking about the voters, the dupes,
Right.
who really thought communists might help Germany. They all switched. They all became Hitler's strongest supporters.
Right.
So it was really amazing because it's like he unified the business class and the conservative class and the working man, and he brought an end to this artificial division of left and right because he did what was good for the people.
Right.
So by the time 1936 rolls around, I mean, really, it's not an exaggeration to say that he had 99% approval.
Yes, he
So all of the ex-communists loved him just as much as the people who hated communists. You know. So there's really nothing. There's nothing like it in history to take a nation that was so broken and so divided, and then restore not only the economic life but the social, the cultural, moral life of the country. It's just an incredible rebound, and the people loved him for it, all of them.
Yeah, and it seemed that he took away all of the little divisions that, like, for example, what we see in our culture today. We have a label for basically every little thing, and that's, that's a leftist ideology where, you're liberal, or you're this, or you're that, right? And to me, he took all of that away, and he said, we're all human,
Right, we're Germans.
Yes. And it's funny when I see lefties, say, well, they try to preach this, but then their actions and their ideology are the direct opposite, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah. They really had their minds screwed up.
They do
by the fake news and by the fake universities, and it's amazing when you study the history of that period. It's the exact same thing. All of the major German newspapers, all the big city ones, were owned by a handful of Jews.
Right.
And they're putting out all of this fake news back then, and you read something like Mein Kampf. I mean, Hitler just goes off on the news, on the press, and the parallels are unmistakable. They're still here. They haven't changed.
Right. And after I read that book that you wrote, The Bad War, everything became clearer, and I could identify.
It does clear things up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I can identify anything that's coming out, and I'm like, oh, okay, I know what that is, and I remember reading about that in the book, by Michael King. So now Wilson during 1910 to 1920, he had some major goals, and there were some big people involved. I think this was on page 36 of your book, the PDF anyway.
Yeah, right. Well, what happened is he had, Teddy Roosevelt was horrible, but after he left, President Taft was a constitutional conservative, nationalist. He was not down with all this one world nonsense and all this globalism and so on. So they really couldn't control him, and it was the first term president. They needed to get rid of him because they had, as their agenda, they needed to establish a central bank, the Federal Reserve Counterfeit Bank,
right?
The first income tax, okay, and this was all necessary in advance of the United States entering a war because you got to be able to finance it.
Right.
They wanted, as we covered earlier, they needed to establish their country of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to establish a skeletal structure of a new world order, a one world government, which after World War I came into fruition as a League of Nations.
Right.
So, they had all of these ambitious plans, and they weren't going to get anywhere with Taft. So they got a little globalist puppet. He was a Princeton professor, and then he became a governor of the state of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
They had dirt. They had dirt on him. He had cheated on his wife, which back in those days would have been a deal breaker if you wanted for president. It was a different moral code back then. You know, today it's like, well, who cares?
Right.
Back then, that was huge. So they had that on him. And to get rid of Taft, they got Teddy Roosevelt to run. He was eligible to run again, even though he already had been president. He was eligible for another term. He ran as third-party candidate. That split the Republican vote between Teddy Roosevelt and Robert Taft. So Wilson, with only 41%, became president of the United States.
Wow. And
then right away they started implementing this agenda. This was the 1912 election. He was inaugurated in 1913. In that very first year, he signed into law the Federal Reserve Bank, the central bank, which Andrew Jackson had killed 80 years earlier. The income tax also went into effect. A few years later came World War I. I mean, he just did everything that Jacob Schiff and Paul Warburg and Bernard Baruch, the big money Jew boys of the Northeast, told him what to do.
Right.
And it was a disaster. Wilson was a disaster, and he lied. He deceived this country into World War I. There's a whole story there. Really, really evil stuff.
Right.
But that is really, again, completely necessary to know this, because it flows into World War II, which flows into the decades after, into today.
Mm-hmm. And it was.
And you could read Wilson's speeches. He's talking about the time has come for a new international economic order. The same gobbledygook gibberish that we hear today about new order and community of nations, all of these buzzwords. I read some of his old speeches, and it's just nothing has changed. It's just progressed.
Right.
But it's the same stuff we see happening today. But you see, its roots back then.
Right. In the same family members, we got the Schiffs, we got Baruchs, we got Warburgs, we've got all the same players in the same family, and they're still around now. And I know that during this time, wasn't China making trouble with Japan and trying to set something? Is there a reason why they were trying to target Japan as well? Do you know? Is it because they had a very independent culture, or
over in the East, Japan was itself an empire. It was independent minded, and they had a vision of an Asia that was free of Western political dominance. So it's very similar to what was going on in Germany. So they were also targeted.
Right.
And one of the ways that FDR began starting trouble with Japan, and this is like 6 years before the war broke out, is they made common calls. They got in bed with the national government of China. So it's, the Chinese aligned their interests with the American interests. And, it was this kind of manipulation that kind of emboldened China to go to war with Japan. And it's a similar scenario that played out with the way that Poland provoked Germany.
Right. Right.
But behind the scenes, the usual suspects were playing their games. And just to fast forward a bit, after the war, they screwed the Chinese too.
Oh, really?
Do that too. Yeah. Because it was, China thought that they would get this territory in Manchuria and all this, all this territory that was controlled by Japan, and instead they gave it to Stalin to occupy. And then he from that position of strength, they helped the communist Mao Zedong to overthrow the very same Chinese government that we had used as an ally. But this is quite common. They'll approach the leaders of a country. They'll say, "Hey, why don't you come join with us, and we can make your country greater and richer, and so on." And then when they're done using them, they'll just throw them out like a used up, leaden rind.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
They.
But yes, also in the West, Japan was Japan is not responsible for starting that element of World War II. They talk about Pearl Harbor, but they don't talk about the fact that FDR was waging war against Japan for about at least 2 years before Pearl Harbor. He was already waging war in many other direct and indirect ways. And at some point, Japan just had enough. And then they said, this is only going to get worse. Might as well do what we can at Pearl Harbor and Guam and get ourselves an early advantage.
In what ways were they...
Now this,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm so, no, it's, that might sound to some people like treasonous for what I'm saying, or this guy really hates his country.
No, it makes sense.
The facts are the facts.
Yes, right.
The attack on Pearl Harbor was justified.
Right. And
because they're waging war against Japan, and they hit back at a military target.
Right. What ways were they? Was FDR provoking Japan?
Well, first he was supporting the Chinese. There were American advisors there. Mm-hmm. There was the OSS was there, which was the forerunner of the CIA. There were American pilots training Chinese pilots. They were even fighting Japanese pilots in the air, American pilots.
Okay.
And they basically interfered. Japan wants to sit down and talk with China, and FDR saying, no, just, well, we got your back. Keep fighting. We got your back.
Wow.
Then they began the threats against Japan. You have to get out of Manchuria, or otherwise we're going to embargo your oil. They shut down the Panama Canal, which is supposed to be neutral.
Okay.
And then finally, FDR said to Japan, "We're cutting off your oil." And, a trade embargo, an economic embargo enforced by American destroyers, that's an act of war, by the way. Can you imagine if a foreign country was using its military to cut off our trade?
Right.
And then finally they said, "We're cutting off your oil. And by the way, if you dare to go into Indonesia to get oil now, you'll be at war with us."
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was just outrageous. It was just outrageous set of humiliations and backstabbing. And he was at war. He was literally at war already with Japan. It just wasn't an all-out war. And at some point, Japan made the calculation: well, look, one way or another, this bastard is coming to war with us. So we might as well do what we can do.
Right.
Even without Pearl Harbor, FDR would have just escalated the thing on his own, like Wilson had done. But there's a long story there. So many outrageous provocations. Battleships, destroyers cruising in between Japanese islands, deliberately deep into their water, baiting the Japanese to hit them.
Wow.
All that kind of stuff was going on. And it was also going on with Germany. And for the longest time, both Germany and Japan just took the humiliation and ignored it because they didn't want the United States to enter the war.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because it would tip the balance, as we've seen. And we see a perfect example of this with Syria today. It's exactly what they're...
Yes.
Israel's been hitting Syria in Iran's army that was invited into Syria. And they keep just trying to provoke and bomb and bomb and bomb and you know, and people, they don't even. I mean, if they would just research a little bit, they would realize the truth, But now we also know, within your book, you talk a little bit. I'm not going to get into much detail, but Churchill was really just a dirty dog, and. He was a monster. Yeah, he was responsible for starving some people, and
the guy was just a mad dog killer, a bum. He failed at every job he ever had in the government. Mm-hmm. He was hated by the British people at one time, but he's just an evil, diabolical man. But they owned him. They bought him up. The big billionaire Jews bought him up, which was easy to do. Because, well, for one, he was a homosexual.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they had, yeah, oh yeah, that's, you know, I can't go into it all now.
Right,
There's
right.
a book called Closet Queens by a establishment British historian that makes the case pretty well. Oh, but this was not common among the British elite. Things weren't that different then than they are today. The queers are everywhere.
Right. Yeah,
but
they are.
had this. They had, yeah. Not only did they have this on Churchill, but he was also a spendaholic. So despite the fact that he came from a wealthy family, this guy was, I mean, he drank the most expensive champagne as if it was water. He wore the most expensive tailored suits. And he kept an entourage. I mean, he was like, you ever hear these stories about these professional basketball or football players in America? They're star players, and then one day they retire, and by the time they're like 35, they're dead broke.
Right.
You hear some of these stories?
You're right.
But he was like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dead broke. There's a picture in one of my books on Churchill where he's sitting inside of a giant hot tub in his house that's empty, but he's sitting in a lounge chair chatting with a friend, and it's empty because he couldn't afford the heating bill, so they had to empty out the pool. So it didn't matter how much money he had.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he came from a wealthy background, just blew it all.
Right.
The Jews came in and they paid off his debts, and they put him back in government.
Mm-hmm.
They made him, and then what happened is, after all, he cashed in big time on the bloodshed with his post-war memoirs. I forget the amount, but he was given an advance from publishing houses. They were competing for his memoirs.
Wow.
He got multi-million-dollar advance. Hollywood wanted to give him an advance on a film, and I mean, he made a fortune on his post-World War II memoirs, which he was already negotiating as the war is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Millions of men are being blown to bits. Well, men, women, and children too. And this guy's got time to make a deal on how much he's going to get for his book.
Right.
Really just sickening stuff. A total monster.
It is. It's
But
disgusting.
yeah, he kept the war going. He did his job.
Right.
He kept the war going in Europe, even though Hitler, you know, they had chased the British off the continent, so they essentially won the war. And he's basically begging Britain, you know, let's stop this.
Right.
You know, the Churchills, and there were people in Britain, even in high places, people in Churchill's own war cabinet, who were pressuring. Listen, why don't we just sit down and talk? Let's mediate third party. Maybe we could end this war without any embarrassment to Britain. Because the deal that Hitler wanted to make is Britain would have to give them nothing. You know, it wasn't like, okay, we'll make peace if you give us this. We want money. We want territory. No, it was basically, let's just stop and go back to the way things were.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really sweetheart deal, but Churchill killed it, and he just bought time because he knew that his partner in crime from across the pond, FDR, would sooner or later drag us into the war. So that was Churchill's great so-called accomplishment that he gets so much credit for.
Right.
You know, they make it seem like he refused to surrender. We'll keep fighting no matter what. And no, he just wanted to keep it going, not because Britain was under any threat, because that was his job, to keep it going till America can arrive. And of course, once that happened, now you got the Soviets in the east, America in the west, and then you got the American industry providing armaments to the British, to the Soviets. And at that point, it was only a matter of time.
Right.
Before, you know, how long could Germany hold out once the United States got involved?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's Churchill.
Yeah.
Just a total monster. One of the great villains of the 20th century.
Right. Yeah. I was completely disgusted when I found out, you know, a lot of the information in your book, and you know, that we supported the Soviets, and how how murderous they were I should say, you know, because the Bolsheviks, we know, are still in power. But yeah, and you know, there's days where it's really difficult for me to deal with that. You know, it gets depressing sometimes.
Oh,
but
it does. There's sometimes I just have to take a break from writing and researching because I mean, it's bad enough to read about what happened, but then when you reflect about it, that it's still going on. The story is not finished yet.
Right.
Yeah, it is depressing, but we have to carry on and
Yes, we do.
fight evil and save as many minds as we can.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I didn't realize this, but Red October is related to part of that Bolshevik Revolution, and
Yeah.
you wrote a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, it was October when the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional democratic government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where the term Red October
Right.
comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, and for all the blood that they were spilling from millions and millions of people that they murdered brutally, just in the most grotesque
Yeah, I mean,
ways.
it was so bad that the United States did not recognize the Soviet Union until 1933.
Mm-hmm.
So the Republican president from after World War I till 1933, it just wasn't recognized. It was just a criminal, barbaric, murderous regime.
Right.
But one of the first things FDR did when he got into office is he began the process, and I think it was 34. The United States officially recognized the Soviet government, which gave it a huge legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, the blood was still flowing at this time.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is who we aligned ourselves with against Hitler. And Hitler was on the brink. Yeah, I mean, he would have taken the Soviet Union out. He would have finished them off in 42.
Yeah. Too bad he didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and Dunkirk. If he had done those two things, I think the world would have been a different place. Hopefully, at least for a while. You know, until the globalists worked their way back in. But so when the communists are taking over Germany after World War I, before World War II, and Hitler is seeing what's going on, and he gets involved in politics, he forms the NSDAP. And was it, I can't remember, was it before, I think it was before the actual formation of the NSDAP, where, you know, the beer hall incident where he tried to create the coup, and he went to prison.
Well, he made alliances with some former military leaders, and Germany was under occupation, a very rough occupation by the French and the Belgians, and they thought that if they overthrew the local authorities in Munich, that it could spark the revolution nationwide, but that failed.
Uh-huh.
And Hitler was arrested, and he kind of became a legend, though, because a lot of people were upset in Germany, and they admired him for his courage, and he almost got killed during this event. So much, and a lot of his comrades did get killed. He went to prison, and in prison he wrote Mein Kampf. And when he came out of prison, he decided, well, a revolution's not going to work, armed uprising. Let me go the political route.
Right. And
that's when he began building the party. And he would give tremendous speeches. He was not only a great orator. Lots of guys are great speakers, but they talk nonsense.
Right.
You read his speeches. He's talking truth, righteousness, logic.
Right.
And he began to build a following, and then they year after year after year, they did better and better in the elections. That's how it went down. And then by the time, when the Great Depression hit, and this was like a double dip for Germany, because they had their Great Depression in the early 20s with the hyperinflation and their life savings being wiped out. Then you had a few years of stability, then the Depression hit. And Germany now has 33% unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you imagine? So, it was total chaos. He was either going to go the National German Socialist Workers' Party or the Communists.
Right, and he saw the filth that the Communists were bringing to Berlin. And unfortunately, we see a lot of what happened in Berlin during that time today.
Yeah.
You know, um,
Yeah.
the now how World War II began. That was that the how you pronounce it, the Kristallnacht? Was that?
Well, Kristallnacht was a year earlier. There were riots that broke out, and they call it Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. A lot of the Jewish-owned shops, they were vandalized that night.
Mm-hmm.
And we constantly hear about that, but we never hear about the event that preceded it or triggered it. And it was a Polish Bolshevik Jew walked into an embassy in France, the German embassy in France, and murdered a young German diplomat in cold blood. And this wasn't the first time that it happened.
Uh-huh.
So obviously there was anger in Germany. But however, there was a systematic pattern to the violence that night. And it really seemed it has all the elements of a false flag attached to it.
Uh-huh.
Because what Kristallnacht did is it really made Germany look bad. And when Hitler heard the news of what was going on that night, this is confirmed by people who were there, he kind of flipped out. He's like, what the hell is going on here? And he calls up Joe Goebbels, and he says, what's going on? I want to explain what's going on. He knew nothing about it. He was very upset about it because, he's been struggling for years against this propaganda in the West about all the horror stories. Just like they do with Assad and what they did with Saddam Hussein.
Right.
They were painting him as a boogeyman, and it wasn't true.
Right.
But now you have this event. You have these riots all over Germany, and these shops being broken up, and it really angered Hitler, and they issued an order immediately that violence must cease. And it did.
And didn't he do a number of those orders to not harm, Jewish citizens in Germany?
That's right. I mean, nobody bothered the Jews in Germany. No one bothered them during the 1930s. That is a total lie. The only laws that were passed prevented them from owning, like, national newspapers.
Right.
They could have their own newspapers and stuff, but they were not going to be able to deliver fake news to the German people anymore. Right. So there were limits on the banking. They took away the banking system. It was a nationalized banking system. So, in those areas, the banking, the media, the control of the universities, it's like, hey, this is for Germans.
Right.
But apart from that, it's like, you want to live here as like resident aliens and respect their laws, you're fine, we'll leave you alone. And a lot of the Jews were doing well. I mean, Kristallnacht is 1938, so that's like almost 6 years into Hitler's term. And you have all of these Jewish-owned businesses in Berlin. Well, presumably they're making money, right? They own all these businesses.
Sure.
So, yeah, they did well, too. I mean, if you were a Bolshevik Jew, most of them packed up and left.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And then there were a number of Zionist Jews who went to British-occupied Palestine. But the ones that remained, if you behaved yourself, nobody bothered you.
Right.
Okay? You weren't going to be a first-class citizen like a German because it's not your country. Okay? I mean, I can't go live in Israel, right?
Right. Right.
And I can't go live in Argentina and be a first-class citizen. I'm sure I would probably take years before I could vote or something,
Right.
So that's all. There was no oppression. But I do believe this Kristallnacht was a propaganda,
a false flag
event.
type thing, right? Now, didn't Judea declare war on Germany first, and they started boycotting German goods? And
yeah, that goes back to 1933, Hitler's first month in power.
Okay.
Worldwide, all the big Jews were protesting. They wanted boycotts and sanctions and no relations with Germany, and that was the term they used. It's right on the major newspapers. Jews of the world declare war against Germany. And that's no small declaration when you consider some of the newspapers that they owned, and
right,
big companies and banks and their influence in the various governments of the world. So,
right.
When the Jews say we're declaring war against you, you got problems. It's not just an empty threat.
Right.
But that was their open declaration, and it was just an intense propaganda in 33 and 34. But it kind of fizzled out. They couldn't sustain it because there was enough, I guess, real journalism back then, and I mean, it just wasn't happening. All of these horror stories,
Right.
So it was still harder to sell.
And there were Zionists that were in 1933. The Havara Agreement was signed, and there were a lot of Zionists that wanted to have European Jews moved to Palestine, which then would become Israel. And Germany helped to actually transport safely a number of people down there, right?
This went on for a while because now the British controlled Palestine. They said, some Jews want to come live here, they can. And I'm sure the Germans were happy to see them go as well.
Right.
But they cooperated, they facilitated this effort. Probably not out of any great love for the Jews, but as hey, they want to go, okay, is that type of deal.
Right.
So there was cooperation with the German government and the Jewish leaders in that respect, and that went on for about a year or so. Because not everybody wanted to leave.
Right. Right.
The communists certainly wanted to leave. The Bolshevik Jews wanted to leave, and those of them who really believed in Zionism, they left. But
right.
There were others. There were others who stayed because they lived well.
Right, and they had an attachment to Germany, and they identified as being Germans, and
some of them had been there for a long time, and there were quite a few of them. They intermarried, or their kids had intermarried. There were actually several 100,000 half German, half Jews who fought for Germany, and some of them were well decorated and fought bravely.
Right.
So you also had that element that was kind of acclimating to German culture in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So no, there was nothing horrible going on at any point throughout the 1930s.
Right.
Unless you were a Jewish communist or you owned a fake newspaper, nobody was bothering you.
Mm-hmm. So how did World War II start now with Poland? I know Poland was had part of Germany's territory after World War I.
Yeah. Well, that they did, and they were horribly abusing the Germans who lived there, and they were making all these ridiculous demands for even more German territory. And this is because the West was backing them up. It was FDR, it was also the British and the French, basically playing the foolish Polish ultra-nationalist government with all these ideas of getting an expanded empire. All you have to do is start the war with Germany, and then we'll come to your assistance.
Right.
So that's how that started. But there were many massacres of Germans in Polish territory, and these were carried out. A lot of them were carried out by Jewish Polish Bolsheviks as well. Mm-hmm. And this went on for a long time. And Hitler was trying to resolve the situation peacefully. At one point, he reached out to the Vatican to mediate as a third party a resolution to the German-Polish issues.
Right.
And it would be Germany, Poland, Britain, France, Italy, and the Vatican. And the Vatican was down with it. Germany was ready to go, but it was the British who said no meetings. They don't want any meetings. They don't want peace. So and this whole story I summarize in The Bad War. And I don't even tell the story. I just reproduce an article from the old New York Times. It's right in there. It says how the British want no part of a mediation with the German Polish situation with the Vatican, and instead, at the very same time, they were trying to form an alliance with Joe Stalin. So they said no to the Vatican, which the Vatican could have played a key role in this because Poland is heavily Catholic.
Okay.
So it would have been ideal.
Right.
That's right there in New York Times. Essentially, it's we don't want any part of a peace deal involving the Vatican. Instead, we're going to make a deal with Joe Stalin.
Unbelievable.
And it's really... I had already known this, but what was shocking to me, Erica, was to find it in the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
You're
right.
So nobody...
it's right there.
Can say, yeah. I mean, hey... people, this is the newspaper that the liberals worship. So are they going to say it's a lie? It's right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what's unique about my book. I go out of my way to use the enemy's sources,
Right.
their concessions, because then, you know, people, they worship the New York Times or the Washington Post or Time Magazine.
Uh-huh.
So it's one thing if a so-called revisionist, fascist historian says it, but it's quite another when you have some of this data being leaked out by, liberal sources. Hey, it's right here in the New York Times. Look what it says.
Right.
Look what they quote. Look what they're saying. So I do a lot of that in my book,
Yes.
which kind of is embarrassing to people.
Yeah, it is.
People promoting the lie. Yeah.
Mhm. Now, why did Germany start internment camps?
Well, when the war broke out in the East with the Soviet Union, Stalin declared unlimited partisan war. This is terroristic war against Germany.
Uh-huh.
And these partisan groups that fought against Germany, there were 100,000 of them were Jewish. They had Jewish partisan gangs.
Wow.
And they were very brutal. They didn't wear uniforms. Okay, they were terrorists. And then even with the other communist partisan groups, they were heavily Jewish infiltrated. So what I'm saying is the Jewish people were, or most of them, they were at war with Germany.
Okay.
Either as guerrillas, or they were giving some sort of material support to the guerrilla groups. And this is a big problem. So you're at war, and you don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Jewish civilians are making war against you.
Right.
So that is why they were interned. Like we did the same thing in the United States to the Japanese. 100,000 Japanese were interned, and they weren't even doing anything.
Right.
They hadn't done anything wrong.
Right.
They just threw them in the internment camps. So nobody can say. FDR did the exact same thing. Okay.
Right.
So that's what the internment was about. They put in the internment camps members of the Communist Party and Jews because these were people who were at war against them.
Right, and they couldn't tell who was who. And,
right.
Well, and especially with the history.
It's their own leaders.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say it's their own leaders of the Jewish community who said that we're at war with Germany.
Right.
All right. So don't blame the Germans. You guys declared war in writing.
Right.
So,
right. Especially with all their behavior that they were doing back in the 20s.
Right.
Actively trying to take over the government.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what's in the internment camps. Communist Party members of all nationalities,
Mm-hmm.
and they interned the Jews. And this was supposed to be temporary.
Right.
And after the war was over, and hopefully victorious for Germany, the Jews were to be given a homeland on the island of Madagascar off the coast of Africa.
Okay.
There's whole books written about it. Google it, the Madagascar Plan. And that's not a bad deal. Very nice climate down here.
Right.
That was the original plan. And then the British attacked Madagascar and took it over. But they were held in the camps, and they were treated humanely. I mean, they got meals. They had Red Cross. The Red Cross camp inspectors came. They had activities for the children. It was very humane treatment.
Right.
And you will not find anywhere in the archives of the Red Cross the Red Cross inspectors saying anything wrong was going on. They had full access to all of the camps right up until the end of the war. The last inspection of Auschwitz was in December of 1944, which was about 5 or 6 weeks before the camp was liberated by the Soviets.
Right.
And I use that word liberated in quotes because most of the inmates chose to go west. Only mainly the hardcore communists stayed behind.
They chose to go with the German soldiers. Then they chose to go with the German soldiers when they evacuated those camps, rather than be liberated by
these. There's stories of a Jewish girl falling in love with the German camp guards. The soccer games were going on. I mean, it's crazy.
Right. And
it's not what it's. You can see some of this is on video. They had Jewish soccer leagues. It was big in the camps.
And they had beer.
Yeah. They had concerts, weddings, babies. 3,000 babies were born at Auschwitz.
Yep.
That's a fact.
Yep.
Do you know
if there's anywhere written by the Red Cross that there was any gas chambers?
No, nothing
Nothing at all.
The only documentation we have is a Red Cross document quoting German sources cooperating with the Red Cross that in total over the course of the war 250,000 people died in the camps. Right.
And that was the natural causes.
And a majority of that will probably be due to things like typhus outbreaks, which happen. And then, of course, there's just, a certain percentage of every population is going to die of natural causes. There was even one case, one camp was bombed by the Allies, and there were hundreds of camp inmates were killed. And they took the bodies, they took pictures of them, they said, "Oh, look what the Germans did." In reality, it was Allied bombardment.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
There's so much of that going on throughout that history.
Yeah.
That, the projection, basically, that they've accused Germany of, the Allies were actually guilty of.
Yeah. And so many of the stories are so ridiculous that even the so-called Jewish scholars of the Holocaust today even admit that these stories were fake. There were stories that they were taking inmates and shrinking their heads to make trinkets, using dead Jews and making lampshades out of their bodies, their skin. Yeah. The soap, making on and on. And they even admit these stories were fake. And millions of Americans. I mean, they didn't have TV back in those days. But what happened is you'd go to the movies, and they would do these newsreels before the movie would start. And it would kind of get the American people up to date, and they were exposed to these stories about the lampshades and shrunken heads, and it turns out to all be fake. So then you got to ask yourself, well, what else is fake? And the answer is everything. Yeah,
basically every single thing. And the post-war war crimes that the Allies are guilty of is just mind-blowing. You touch a little bit upon that in your book too.
Yeah, horrific stuff. It's just horrible stuff that's hard to even read about. It's like picture just like the nastiest, raunchiest Hollywood horror movie, and then imagine it to be reality. What they did to the German people, the torture, the mass rape. Again, establishment historians now concede that an estimated 2 million German women in the East were gang raped by the Red Army. Yeah. Some of them were raped so badly they died of the rapes. Some of them were raped and then killed. Some of them were raped in front of their children. It was just the devil was just turned loose on the German people. Right. Just the hideous tortures. I mean, it sends chills up the spine. That was the most difficult part for me to research and write about.
Yeah. And in Italy, I guess there were 4,000 Italian women that were gang raped by the French-controlled African armies. And I mean,
that's right. They turned the Africans loose. Yeah, there was one case in Monte Cassino. They just ran wild. The Moroccans, they raped 4,000 Italian women. They raped the priest. They raped some small boys. And there was no punishment. And ultimately, Eisenhower was responsible because these French were under the jurisdiction of the French. The French had been knocked out of the war, but then when the Americans got in, there was another faction of the French fought with the Americans. So they were under de Gaulle. But ultimately, they were under Eisenhower. Nobody was punished. Yeah. And then this continued all throughout Germany and France. There were a lot of French. Now, we supposedly liberated France, right?
Right.
And when the Allied troops came ashore, there were civilians.
Yeah.
If there was so much as a whiff of any Germans in the area, they'd blow up the town.
Wow.
70,000 French civilians. It was that's so-called liberation. Hundreds of thousands homeless. The area was just devastated economically for years. Then came the rapes. All of this is buried history, you know. And you watch these Hollywood movies; they portray it as a glorious, liberation.
Right.
But that's how they rolled. They just bombed the hell out of everything. And then what they do is they project that onto the Germans as the ones bombing all these civilians recklessly, when it's not the case at all. Germany, they didn't even build heavy bombers. They use light bombers. Because heavy bombers, they fly at high altitudes, they just bomb indiscriminately. You're killing soldiers and civilians alike.
Right.
They didn't even build such planes. They use the light bombers because you can pinpoint, like if you're going after a munitions factory or so on. Okay? But no, not the American and the British. We had entire fleets, thousands of them in the air. These things are bigger than 747s, loaded with huge bombs the size of automobiles. Just carpet bomb everything. They just kill them all.
Blowing the shit out of everything, basically. Just
bomb the shit out of everything.
Yeah.
Yep, kill the children, kill the women, and kill the German soldiers if there's any there. In some cases, there weren't even soldiers there. It's just bomb it anyway.
Wow.
You get into the truth of this stuff. It was just a mass murder on a whole scale, and we treat this as this glorious event that saved mankind.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my God! And now mind you, Erica, I believed this bullshit up until my mid-30s. Okay. And now I'm in my early 50s, so I was not awake my whole life. I believed all that crap. And when you first get turned on to what a lie it is, it's difficult to deal with, and it changes you forever.
It does.
You can't go back.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does.
Sure.
And I found, doing the streaming is really a healthier outlet for me, and it helps me deal with it a little bit better.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it does, and there is. I do what I do for two reasons. One, it's a calling because I have this knowledge, and I feel to kind of hold it in and not share it with as many people as I can is almost like a sin. Okay? Right. And then the other part of it is there is a therapeutic value to it. It
is. It is therapeutic. And I want to just scream out to everybody, "This is the truth." Listen. So I greatly appreciate you coming on and talking with all of us about it. You made a really good point in your book about D-Day, and it was the 6th hour of the 6th day of the 6th month.
That's right. And no one knows what the D in D-Day stands for.
True.
Might that be devil?
True.
And also, the official name of the operation was Operation Overlord, which the Satanists, they refer to Satan as the Overlord. So there's no question. You have that satanic imagery and terminology.
Right.
And you see it now. It's everywhere. It's in your face. You're looking at advertisements. I mean, these people really do worship Satan. It's not just a few crackpots who do this. There's people in high places. So yeah, there's no question that that's not a coincidence. The 6th hour, the 6th day, the 6th month.
Yeah.
And at that precise moment, and you can actually find this on YouTube, although I quote it in the book, but you can even listen to the actual audio of Eisenhower at 6 a.m. in the morning. Everybody's sleeping. He makes a radio broadcast to the French. It says, "You are advised to evacuate, travel lightly, go now, avoid being in groups you might be mistaken for enemy troops." So at 6 in the morning, he's telling them, "We're going to bomb the shit out of these towns. You better get up and get the hell out."
Wow.
And it's on YouTube. You can hear this broadcast, but nobody heard it back then at 6 a.m.
Right. 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 If they had a radio at that time, if it wasn't destroyed.
So I don't know. This is way of making it look like he's a nice guy. Hey, I'm giving you a warning, and then boom, I kill 70,000 Frenchmen.
Right.
You look up the ruins of the city of Cayenne, Caen. I mean, it looks like Hiroshima, and this is how we liberated France.
Wow.
This just annihilated the whole town. Italy too. We were so-called liberating Italy, and we flipped them. We put in a puppet government, and we flipped them to our side, but there were still Germans there. There was 60,000 Italians. Now there are allies tonight, women and children killed. You know,
yeah.
I have on my Italian side of my family. I had an old uncle who tells about this. He says, "Oh, you don't know what the Americans did. They bombed the whole market. They killed all these people who were shopping, and you know." And I remember many years ago hearing this, like I was maybe in my teens, and I'm like, "Oh, this old man's crazy."
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But this is the story I got firsthand. I never forgot it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I didn't believe it, he was just saying an entire market full of people in southern Italy was just obliterated by American bombers.
Yeah.
There were no Germans anywhere in sight. And, you know, he was long gone after I did my research, before I did my research.
Right.
I almost wish I would say, wow, I'm sorry I didn't believe you, you know.
Right.
But you have these stories all over Europe. American and British bombs, they just bombed everything. They didn't care.
Right.
They made no, you know.
No, they didn't. They did not. They unleashed hell on earth.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, Eric, at the size of these bombs, and they're still all over Germany, by the way. Every few months you'll read a story. Just recently, a few months ago, was it near Munich? They had to evacuate 30,000 people.
Wow.
That gives you an idea how big the bomb was. So they discovered a bomb and it just kind of buried.
Wow.
It didn't blow off. And they have to deactivate these things. And then you see the pictures of them. I mean, they're the size of maybe like a big SUV. And it's a bomb.
Wow. I didn't realize they were that big.
Well, they're huge. And they would pack these bombers, these heavy bombers that were, like I said, I mean, they're bigger than 747s. And they just open up and imagine these bombs, the size I just described, hundreds of planes at a time, and they're falling like raindrops.
Jeez.
Oh, the terror that must...
I can imagine. I can't even imagine.
I mean, how many people must have died of heart attacks without even getting hit by the bomb, you know?
Sure, right.
Oh, God, I need to dig into some of these stories. And what's interesting is I get a lot of feedback by email by some of the old-timers who lived in a lot of these countries. And they come across, and they'll send me these little anecdotal stories. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
This one telling me about how, our village was bombed and our food was taken. And I got one from a Dutch lady that said when the British came into Holland, because they had to, I think when the Germans came into the Netherlands to stop the British, and then they had to occupy it, and they would put the German troops in some of the homes to quarter them. And this woman said, "Oh, I remember how nice they were, and how clean and respectful they were, and they helped us gather wood and everything." So you get stories of this horrific conduct by the Allied soldiers, and then I get these first-hand stories about what gentlemen the Germans were.
Right.
They had a very strict code, and it really gives me an insight. I'm very grateful when some of these old-time people contact me.
Right.
To tell their story, and these people are in their 80s or 90s. It's just wow, what a letter they just wrote me.
They have, we have to get all their stories before they're all before it's too late and they're all gone. I mean, I don't know if it is too late, but if there's anybody left, I'd love to see. Do you plan on writing a book about all the testimonies someday?
One thing I regret is not printing these all out as they came in. I'm thinking over a period of the last 5 years, I probably get like 3 or 4 of them a year. It'd be very difficult for me to dig them up, but I got like 20 good ones, I got one once from a Russian soldier who was telling me about how, some of them were very disgusted at what was going on with the rapes and everything.
Right.
But they were given green light So really, the only thing holding them back would be, if you had a conscience or not.
Right.
So evidently there were some Russians and there were some Soviet officers who tried to stop this.
Uh-huh.
And in their own way, they said to their whatever men were under their command, you get caught doing this, you're going to be severely punished.
Right.
But so here was like an ex-Russian soldier telling his story about how badly he felt and what he was seeing going on in the East.
Right.
And thanking me for my research. So that's because all those Soviet soldiers, they're just helpless draftees.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't mean that every single one of them was a rapist.
Right.
And,
right.
Yeah, they're just doing what they're.
How interesting. That's and that's got to give you some comfort knowing that these people are reaching out to you and saying thank you.
Yeah, it's almost as if I got a story to tell, and who can I tell it to?
Right.
And it's tough for them.
Right.
Very, very grateful, but I really wish I had printed them out as they came in. But they came in dribs and drabs. Who knew that over?
Right.
I'm thinking over time, because it does happen. I bet there were like 20 such accounts.
Right. I was thinking, I know the audience would like to ask you some questions, but can we take maybe a 5-minute break? Do you have time,
yeah, sure.
or are we getting too late?
I'd like to wrap up by 11. I mean, we don't have to take a break, but definitely would like to wrap up by 11.
Okay. Why don't we just go ahead and we'll take some questions from the audience.
Okay.
And, so does anybody have any questions? I'm reading. I have the chat up here. Just wait for maybe a minute, and I'm sure we'll have some people. Some people are saying, "Oh, I'm from Jersey too." Now, have you lived in Jersey your whole life?
Yes.
Okay.
North Jersey, yeah.
Okay. Glory to the King Jesus, says Michael S. King. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And there's sometimes a little bit of a lag from when we're talking and what they hear on YouTube. So, Trent asks, was the Thule Society one of the main motivators behind the National Socialists?
No, not really. I mean, listen, there were elements of the whole movement at that time that were there were some shady characters in the early National Socialist movement. Okay, and when Hitler came to power, at one point there was an attempted overthrow of Hitler. There were Ernst Röhm was the head of the SA, which is a paramilitary wing of the National German Workers' Party at the time. And, although he was allied with Hitler to come to power, he was not a good guy. He was a homosexual. He was left-wing. Some of these guys were into the occult. So...
And who was the head of the SA? Who was that?
Ernst Röhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's just like one example. So there were some bad apples in the movement, and then kind of Hitler cleaned them up.
Got rid of them. Okay.
I'm not too knowledgeable about the civil society in particular.
Okay.
But I do know that the objection comes up. People will mention some of these shady characters and these homosexuals. But this was in the early days, and then Hitler cleaned them up.
Okay.
When these bad actors tried to overthrow him.
Okay. So,
but as far as Hitler, he was a very clean.
Okay, so he was not an occultist then.
No way. No, he's not a cult. He's not homosexual.
Right.
He was not a British agent or none of this nonsense.
And not a Rothschild.
No, complete rubbish. I did a whole piece on that.
Right.
He's the real deal.
Yep.
He put the biggest Rothschild in Austria in jail. Okay.
That's awesome, isn't it? This is great.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah.
Let's see if we have any other questions. Let's see. We have is the Pope satanic, in your opinion?
The current Pope?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, historically, no. I mean, the satanic Marxists, they began to make inroads into the Catholic Church. Yeah, it might even be as long as 100 years ago. And there was gradual infiltration and penetration. But as far as this what's happened now with this total, well, not total, but with this heavy satanic Marxist child rapist influence, yeah, it's something more of the last 30 years, but it was gradually building.
Right.
You know, it was by design. So I don't know if he means the Pope in general. He's saying, like, historically, I would say absolutely not. But this particular Pope, I call him Poop Frankie. This guy has a long history on him. He is a straight-out Argentinian communist and a Satanist and a cover-upper of child rape.
Yes, he's disgusting.
It's very bad. It's a very bad man.
Yeah, he looks evil. I mean, and children.
Yeah.
Children. And here's the thing: I was looking through your book. You have a book that mostly of photographs of Hitler, with children and animals and people and the kids.
Yeah.
I look at those children in their eyes, and you could just tell they loved Hitler.
He did, and the animals too. He had this magical power around animals.
Yes, he did.
Fear. There's birds that come up to him.
Right. Yeah.
And you can't fake that. And you get these people say, "Oh, well, it's just public relations." No, because a lot of these images came from his inner circle. They were discovered after the war. They're like private videos.
Right.
So it's not like, "Hey, let me go out and kiss a baby, show everybody what a great guy I am." No, this was genuine, and you could see his face light up around the children and the animals and the women. They all adored him.
Yes. Yep.
Because he was a saintly man. He truly was.
Yes, he was. We have another question. What do you know of Eisner? What was his role in orchestrating the collapse of Germany in 1918?
Eisner? I can't answer that. I don't know that individual in particular. I mean, obviously his name sounds Jewish, but I could speak in a general sense of what the big money Jews did to collapse Germany. And, at that time, it really started with betraying Germany during the war at a pivotal point where Germany had a chance to actually win the war and end it. They organized those munition strikes in the factories, so they crippled Germany with strikes. Then you had the big money Jews with their financial gains brought on the economic collapse. So in that sense, yeah, they were crippling and collapsing Germany after World War I with the intention of Bolshevizing it. So I mean, I suspect this individual that he mentioned, Eisner, was part of that effort. But there were many others. That's what triggered the anti-Semitism. Because it was a Bolshevik revolution run by these people, and it involves an economic collapse following a deliberate sabotaging of a war effort.
Right. One last question. Now, I know that you wrote a book, The War Against Putin, and this was back in 2015, 2016, and I kind of thought I kind of believed along the same lines that you had in regards to Trump, and could he possibly be the real deal? And then now I'm kind of finding out that he's surrounded by, all these heavy Zionists, and has your view changed, or is it still the same?
Of Putin and Trump?
Yes.
My view is this, that the unfortunate reality is that these these Jews are here. They're a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
And it would be impossible to shut them down in terms of a direct frontal assault.
Right.
unless you made common cause with some other branch of the Jews. Like the Zionist Jews are typically, well, many of them are anti-globalist, anti-Marxist, okay, anti-New World Order. That doesn't mean that they're great guys. They just got their own agenda.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Which is Israel first. And to the extent that Israel first, Israel against globalism, Netanyahu hates George Soros. Okay?
Right.
Again, that doesn't make Netanyahu a nice man. He's a monster in his own right.
Right.
But there is common cause to be made between, if you're America first or a Russian first and an Israel first, in battling the globalists. So I believe what you're saying, and this is true of other European nationalist leaders, is that they're very much, they've made an alliance and they're sympathetic to the Israel firsters. And I'm conflicted of it because I know what Israel is. I know how they treat the Palestinians.
Right.
I don't want to be in bed with it. And yet, at the same time, at the high levels of politics, it's easy for us to make criticism. But,
right.
You're dealing with a reality of this these powerful people who have to be, dealt with.
Right.
But I will say this: ultimately, there's a hope that Trump will take these globalists down and expose everything. But if someone like Netanyahu gets away with 9/11, he played a role in it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Then that would be a shame. Even if we do somehow deal a devastating blow to the globalists, it would just really be tragic if the Israelis got off the hook. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess we have to see how history plays out. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a Putin or a Trump.
Right.
And if you get the realities are so powerful, if you get them too pissed off, it can backfire on you. It's almost like you have to maneuver the situation.
Right.
But yes, they are, to some extent. Now, I will say this: in many ways, Trump has pissed off the Israelis. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this decision, he wants to pull out of Syria.
Right.
They're not happy with that in Israel. They're like, no, you do that, then Russia and Iran are going to have influence. Trump has betrayed us, et cetera, et cetera. So he is not a total slave, and nor is Putin by any means a designer.
Right.
However, they do appear willing to make common cause with them in the greater battle against the Bolshevik international Jews.
Right.
That's the most I can tell you. I think we still got to wait a few more years to really take a better look at things go.
Right. But, see how it goes. Well, everybody, please go to tomatobubble.com and sign up to Michael S. King's email, and please purchase The Bad War. Go to patreon.com and please become his Patreon. Michael, I want to extend everybody's gratitude for you giving up your time and answering our questions and sharing with us your knowledge about World War II and everything prior to that. I hope that you will come back and discuss more on other books that I'm going to be reading of yours.
Sure.
I enjoyed myself. I hope you did.
It's a blast. It's always, for me, it's always a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk to people who are at least willing to listen, even if they don't get it or agree with it all at one time.
Right. Right.
Just to have that frame of mind puts somebody ahead of 90% of the population who don't want to hear this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and I've shared some of your interview videos with people to help with spreading the truth, and I myself and the rest of us at GNN are honored that you took the time to take part in this interview, and I hope to talk with you very soon again.
We will. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, you have a good night.
Good night.
All right,
Bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.